let's talk about With the Lightnings by David Drake, Royal Cinnabar Navy, book number 1. This is a space opera by the author of the hard military sci-fi Hammers, Slammers, which I've talked about a bit before on this channel, which I thoroughly recommend. This is his other big series so far as I know, so far as I can tell. It's also from Baen Books. I think there are 10 or more of these. This was published in 1998, which does make interesting, by the way, the adverts won the adverts at the back of Fun because advertises particularly Lois McMaster Bujold, which is a fair comparison in several ways, and also an bi-monthly electronic magazine of science fiction, fantasy and fact called Jim Baen's Universe, with such luminaries writing in it as Elizabeth Baird, David Brin, David Drake, Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson, Barry Malzberg, Garth Nix, young Garth Nix, I guess, and Gene Wolfe, and many others. But yeah, the 1998 for a counter analog delivered to me by email, very interesting. It does say no DRM. The idea that in 98 was really before, in my memory, before DRM became a big public controversy. But anyway, yeah, it's a space opera. It's advertised on the back. In terms of its quotes, it's compared to Horatio Hornblower and John Wayne. On the front, by the way, there's one of my favourite blurbs because it just gets the names of the characters wrong. But yes, on the back you have a comparison to Hornblower and John Wayne. This is much more comparable in terms of direct peer. The Volkosgan saga certainly would be a direct peer. In some respects, space opera with some similar vibes. I'll touch on that as I talk. But in terms of other fiction, it's based on Aubrey Maturin. I've talked about Master and Commander this year on the channel. These are historical Napoleonic Wars stories about sailing, and they are heavy on friendship. They are heavy on nauticality. They're heavy on being granular about the experience of being on these Royal Navy ships, rather than the more romantic or romanticising Hornblower. They are, very romantic in their own way, these books. But yes, With the Lightnings is obvious, and when I was reading Goodreads after finishing it, several people were like, "Oh, Drake explicitly says this is based on Aubrey Maturin," which I hadn't seen, but it was very obvious reading it. The core of it is that you have two main characters, Daniel Leary and Adele Mundy, and they are both from Cinnabar, which is a planet, and it's the hub of a republic. And Daniel is a lieutenant who is on the outs with his politically very powerful father. He's a lieutenant in the Navy, in the space fleet, but he doesn't really have prospects. And he's been assigned as a supernumerary, basically, on a diplomatic mission to an independent world that's allied with Cinnabar called Kostroma. Adele is from a family that was purged due to apparent complicity in an enemy conspiracy, with a significant move in that being Daniel's father. She survived because she was studying on an enemy world, basically, which presumably only emphasised how guilty she must be. So they are, in some ways, they have a shared background. In some ways, they have a degree of rivalry or opposition. Albeit, it's important, therefore, that Daniel is not close to his father. And they're on this world Kostroma, where there are political machinations going on to do with with Cinnabar and the Alliance, which is the antagonistic state. And they end up having to work together to basically stop a very bad situation getting worse. The blurb is kind of useless because it's partly literally not true, but also because where it is true, it's being intentionally very vague, and that's not necessarily a bad strategy, but it is. In this case, it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen next. What the book's going to be about. What the book is about these two characters becoming friends and having to deal with an emerging crisis in kind of action and daring do and friendship and stuff. Now, the only big criticism I have, and it is a significant one in some ways, is that this is 400 pages to the dot, on the dot, but it takes about 150 pages for the real main plot to get going. It seems like there's the hint of excitement after about 50 pages. I concluded that wasn't actually, presumably, thinking about it, wasn't the main plot. The main plot sparks in a different way to what this warning, this hint of something coming seems to be. So yeah, it takes a long time to establish the characters, and I think I kind of go back and forth about how negative I feel about that. I don't feel very negative. I did like the book and I could get over it, but I think what it reminded me of was my frustrations with reading Robin Hobb, who's a good author, but my problem there is on a far bigger scale is issues of repetition and needing to establish the same point several times. And I think Drake doesn't do that. He doesn't do that in Hammer Slammers at all. But here he's trying to establish these characters. And so though there's not quite the same issue of like a specific point about a character being emphasised in 3 fairly long scenes, so you kind of just about get it. And there's just a touch of that sometimes where you think, am I getting anything else about this character? Is this scene really pushing forward the world, the characters, or the plot? And because often your conclusion is just going to be, oh, I'm not sure. And it goes on for 150 pages, and it's kind of pleasant. The main characters, and I'll talk about them in a second, are good, but it's not very exciting. Then the main plot really starts, in terms of you've got the setup and the prologue, as it were, that's very long. And then you have 250 pages of some of the most consistent, coherent, and engaging action you'll get anywhere. So it's a book of two halves, basically, and I think it suffers from needing to, the felt need to establish the world in a particular way, compared to how he does it in the Hammers short stories, which is how Hammers started. It doesn't mean by the time you get to the Hammers novels, they're often 150 pages. They're really, in modern terms, novellas, but they're short novels. They are Hugo-length novels, 150, 200 pages. You're paying the piper, the warrior, things like that, or the actual novella, the Tank Lords, just don't establish the world like that. They assume somewhat some knowledge, and where they don't, it's much more elliptical and quick and gets going. Whereas here, there's a lot of texture given, and it's because the genre shift from hard military sci-fi to space opera, or relatively hard military sci-fi. But it means that as an opener to a series of exciting space operas, which I assume they are, this is not necessarily the strongest for that. That section is not. However, as I say, the second half, or whatever, just over half, is incredible fun. And the biggest strength of the whole thing, including the slower first half, is that Daniel and Adele are both very good characters. Drake does characters. He's not. You think about someone like Joachim Steuben, or indeed Colonel Hammer, or Danny, or Rob Jen, in the Slammers, or Lucas and Slim. Is that his name? Whatever, in the Warrior and the Soldier, or the Warrior, or whatever it's called. I think it's the Warrior and the Soldier, isn't it? These are very good characters. Here I think we've got a step up, and there's the interiority is established over a far longer time. This is the one justification for that long intro, and the way the characters run out is they're a really interesting pair, and they're not super similar to Aubrey and Maturin necessarily, but there are some similarities. Adele she's a librarian, she's a civilian, and she's more pensive than the other guy, and Daniel is a fairly cheerful sailor like Jack. But I'd say the big thing, actually Leary is more like a less neurotic Miles Vorkosigan. He's incredibly, cheerful is a good word, sunny, a happy warrior. Adele is much more pensive, introspective, and not necessarily neurotic, but certainly a little bit bruised, and their interiority, the interior dialogue they get, and the degree to which you get to know their thought processes helps you kind of get this. And then as they interact and as you see the kind of way their personalities spark off each other, that really does go somewhere. There are a few other supporting characters, particularly Daniel's childhood servant Hogg, who is with him and staying with him despite the falling out with his father. I think Hogg was a maternal appointment. Hogg's great, so are some of the other supporting characters. It's not a big cast that matters. In terms of characters you need to know the names of, there's a couple of political figures. There are some officers of the RCN, the Royal Cinnabar Navy, who you don't really need to know the names of, or at least remember them well. You get to know those people who work closest with Daniel. And there is an antagonist you know the name of, but who is, he's only passingly an antagonist in a sense, because the way the plot wants to resolve things and do things doesn't rely on sort of, and then they had the great, it doesn't really dramatically rely on that they had the great showdown or whatever else. So yeah, it's good fun. It's once it gets going, which takes a while, it's incredibly pacey. The characters are very strong. The world is interesting. I'll try to get yeah, there we go. You can, with the ring light messing up, you can see the ships go through sponge space, and the big thing that his mumbo jumbo about space lets him do, and this is good, is it allows them to have sails that have to be raised to kind of, you could think of it in solar wind terms, but so, about negotiating through sponge space and stuff. Rigging matters. It allows the Age of Sail feel to it. It's a minor thing, and this is mostly planet bound, so this is actually not the space combat one. But yeah, I will certainly be continuing. It was a great success for me. And I think if you like action, if you like sailing, kind of that sort of military and Age of Sail stuff that's on the lighter side, if you like space opera, I think this will do it for you. If you have read it or read Hammers, Slammers or something else of Drake's, I'd love to hear what you think. Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you next time.